The gas giant Tessera hung in the void, like a bruised fruit, a colossal sphere of swirling cobalt and violet storms that dominated the entire western view of the Aurora Spire. From the vantage point of the lower residential rings, the planet seemed close enough to touch its gravity, a heavy, comforting blanket, against the cold vacuum. Ethan Ward wiped his hands on a rag, stained with polishing oil and synth grease. He stood by the panoramic window of his workshop, watching the slow, hypnotic rotation of the cloud bands below. The spire, a needle of transparent aluminum and singing crystal, did not orbit in silence. To the uninitiated, the station was quiet, save for the hum of air recyclers and the distant murmur of the transit tubes. But to Ethan, the spire was never silent. It hummed, it thrummed. It sang a low, resonant chord that vibrated in the marrow of his bones. He turned back to his workbench. Scattered across the surface were the guts of a holographic projector, a half-assembled violin made of carbon fiber, and a set of crystalline chimes awaiting tuning. This was his life, carefully curated and deliberately small. The sign above his door read, "Ward's Repairs and Restorations," a humble title for the only human on the station who could make a Lunari resonance crystal sing in the key of C major without shattering it. Ethan picked up a tuning fork, struck it against the edge of the table, and held it to the chime. A pure high note pierced the air. He frowned. It was sharp. Not by much, perhaps 1/100th of a semitone, but enough to itch at the back of his mind. He closed his eyes, and for a fleeting second, he let the barrier in his mind drop. The world shifted. The physical boundaries of the workshop, the metal tools, the wooden shelves, the smell of solder and pine, faded into a grayscale background. Overlaying them was a tapestry of light. This was the lumen. It flowed like liquid silk through the walls of the station, pooled in the energy conduits, and danced in frantic, jagged spikes around the Lunari pilgrims walking in the corridor outside. He looked at the chime. To his naked eye, it was flawless quartz. To his second sight, the flow of energy within the lattice was knotted, a tangled skein of blue light, where it should have been a straight line. With a sigh, he picked up a microfile. He did not need to measure. He simply felt the knot in his mind, and his hands moved to smooth it out physically. Scrape, scrape, tap. He struck the fork again. Perfect harmony. The itch in his brain vanished. Ethan quickly pulled his mental shields back up, extinguishing the light show. He exhaled a breath he had not realized he was holding. It was a dangerous game using the sight. Even here in the sanctuary of the spire, where artists and scientists from a dozen systems gathered in the name of peace, being a freak was not a safe occupation. He was 32 years old, and for 20 of those years, he had been hiding. The memory of the Heartstorm was always there, lurking behind his eyelids when he tried to sleep. He remembered the expedition with his parents to the surface of Neuralis, the Lunari moon world. He remembered the sky turning the color of a fresh bruise, the air screaming as the magnetic fields collapsed, and the way the very ground seemed to liquefy into light. He had been separated from the evac shuttle. A terrified 12-year-old boy huddled in a crystalline cave, watching the storm of pure energy tear the world apart. He had reached out. It was a stupid, childish instinct. He had seen a pulsing, jagged shard of crystal embedded in the wall, singing a song of absolute terror, and he had reached out to comfort it. When his skin touched the crystal, the universe screamed into his nervous system. He woke up 3 days later in a medical bay, his parents weeping with relief. The doctors said it was a miracle he had survived the radiation. They checked him for burns, for cancer, for brain damage. They found nothing. But Ethan knew better. The storm had not killed him. It had moved inside him. Since that day, the world was too loud, too bright, too full of unseen currents. He heard the emotional state of the Lunari like a radio broadcast. He felt the structural stress in a metal beam before the sensors did. He was a human, radio-tuned to a frequency that no one else knew existed. A chime at the door interrupted his brooding. Ethan smoothed his expression into one of mild, welcoming disinterest, his default mask, and turned. "We are open, but if it is a toaster, it will have to wait until Tuesday." The door slid open, revealing a human woman with hair the color of rust, and eyes that looked like they had seen the bottom of every library in the quadrant. Arya Solon. She carried 2 steaming cups of something that smelled like roasted nuts and caffeine. "It is not a toaster," Arya said, stepping inside and letting the door hiss shut behind her. "And it is Thursday, Ethan. You have lost track of the rotation cycle again." "Thursday," Ethan repeated, taking the cup she offered. "Right. That explains why the station feels heavier. Thursday gravity." Arya rolled her eyes, leaning her hip against his workbench, careful not to knock over the disemboweled violin. "That is not how artificial gravity works, and you know it. You just need to get out more. I did not see you at the Great Hall yesterday. The Lunari choir from the southern continent was performing. It was transcendent." "I was busy," Ethan said, gesturing vaguely at his tools. "The ventilation fans in Sector 4 were rattling. Someone had to fix them before they drove the residents crazy." "Maintenance droids could have done that," Arya countered, blowing on her drink. "Droids lack finesse," Ethan murmured. "They fix the spin, but they leave the harmonic vibration. I'll fix the hum." Arya studied him over the rim of her cup. She was a linguist, a cultural translator, hired by the Spire's Administrative Council to bridge the gap between the chaotic verbal humanity and the silent, color-shifting Lunari. She had a way of looking at people as if she were translating them, parsing their syntax to find the hidden meaning. "You act like a mechanic," she said softly. "But you talk like a poet who is afraid of his own rhymes." "You should have heard the choir, Ethan. The way they manipulate the lumen is not just light. It is emotion given physical form. I thought of you." Ethan stiffened slightly. "Why, because you appreciate sound," she said, though her eyes lingered on his hands, the long, calloused fingers of a musician. "And because I think you understand them better than you let on. I saw you last week negotiating with that Lunari merchant for parts. You did not use the translator device once." "I guessed," Ethan lied smoothly. He turned red. Red usually means anger or high price. I walked away. He turned blue. "Blue is calm, reasonable. We made a deal. It is basic color theory, Arya, not linguistics." Arya smirked. "Right. Basic color theory. Just like how you knew that the stabilizer on the docking ring was going to fail 2 hours before the alarm went off last month." "Lucky guess," Ethan said, taking a sip of his drink to hide his face. It was hot, bitter, and grounding. "Are you here to psychoanalyze me, or did you break your datapad again?" "Neither," Arya said, pushing off the table. "I just came to make sure you were still alive. You have been holed up in here for 3 days. The Festival of Lights is approaching. The Spire is filling up with pilgrims. It is beautiful out there, Ethan. You are missing it." "I have a good view from here," he said, nodding toward the window and the giant planet beyond. "It is not the same," she said, her voice softening. "You are safe here, I know. But sometimes safe is boring." She placed her empty cup on the bench. "I have a meeting with the High Priestess's delegation. Don't work too late. And eat something that isn't dehydrated protein paste." With a wave, she was gone, leaving a faint scent of ozone and perfume in the air. Ethan stared at the closed door. Arya was the closest thing he had to a friend, mostly because she was the only one persistent enough to ignore his hermit act. She suspected he was more than a mechanic, but she had no idea of the scale of it. If she knew he could see the very soul of the energy she studied, she would probably drag him to a lab to be studied. Or worse, she would look at him the way everyone else did when he slipped up with a mix of awe and fear. He turned back to the window. The station lights were dimming for the night cycle. The Aurora Spire did not have a military. It had no guns, no shields, no generals. It was a sanctuary, a neutrality zone built by the Interstellar Coalition and the Lunari Matriarchy to foster peace. It was a place of art, of science, of philosophy. And yet Ethan felt the tension. The lumen in the station's superstructure had been twitching lately. Spikes of dissonance, like a violin string wound just a little too tight, waiting for the snap. He shook his head. Not my problem, he told himself. I fix toasters. I fix violins. I do not fix geopolitical energy crises. He worked for another 3 hours, losing himself in the mechanical rhythm of polishing the violin's bridge. The station grew quiet. The corridor outside his shop was empty. Then he heard it. It was not a sound. It was a ripple, a tiny, frantic disturbance in the lumen field, like a stone thrown into a still pond. It was close. Ethan paused, his hand hovering over a chisel. He waited. A physical sound this time. Something scratching at the metal plating of his door. It was too low to be a person, too tentative to be a cleaning bot. Ethan frowned. He walked around the counter and pressed the release panel. The door hissed open, revealing the empty corridor. "Hello," he called out softly. Nothing. Just the polished floor and the soft blue ambient lighting of the hallway. He looked down. There, huddled against the doorframe, was a ball of trembling purple fur. It was a Lunari. But it was tiny, no bigger than a terrestrial house cat, though its anatomy was distinctly alien. Its paws were slightly too large for its body, ending in blunt, crystalline claws. Its ears were long and tufted, swiveling independently. But the most striking feature was its bioluminescence. Adult Lunari controlled their light with the precision of a master painter. This creature, however, was flashing erratically spasms of violet dull gray and sickly yellow. A kitten. A baby Lunari. Ethan froze. He had seen Lunari young before, but always from a distance, guarded fiercely by their mothers in the upper sanctums. They were rare, precious, and never ever left alone. The creature looked up at him. Its eyes were enormous, 2 pools of liquid gold with vertical slit pupils that were blown wide with panic. It opened its mouth and let out a sound that broke Ethan's heart instantly, a high, wavering trill that sounded like a glass bell cracking. "Hey there," Ethan whispered, crouching down slowly, so as not to spook it. "You are a long way from the nursery, little one." The kitten shivered violently. Its light dimmed to a fearful gray. It took a step back, but then, as if remembering why it had come, it shuffled forward again. In its mouth, it held something. It dropped the object at Ethan's boots and looked up, letting out another desperate trill. Ethan looked at the object. It was a toy, a spinning top carved from a single piece of resonating sunstone. It was beautiful work, etched with glyphs, that Ethan recognized as a nursery rhyme about the moons of Tessera. But it was broken. The central axis was hairline fractured, and the internal lumen core. The tiny spark of energy that allowed it to float was dark. The kitten nudged the broken toy with its nose, then looked at Ethan. The message was universal. It transcended species biology and culture. "It is broken. Please fix it." Ethan looked at the hallway. Empty. No frantic parents. No guards. How had this tiny thing gotten all the way down to the engineering sector? "I am not supposed to touch Lunari artifacts," Ethan murmured to the cat. "Especially not whatever this is. There are protocols. I should call security." The kitten whimpered. A tear, thick and silver like mercury, welled up in its golden eye and slid down the fur of its cheek. Ethan cursed internally. Protocols be damned. "Okay," he sighed. "Okay, don't cry. I cannot handle crying. Come inside before someone sees you." He scooped up the broken top. The kitten hesitated, then darted between his legs into the warmth of the shop. Ethan sealed the door and locked it. He placed the toy on his workbench under the magnifier light. The kitten hopped onto the stool beside him, watching with intense, vibrating anxiety. Its light was still pulsing a nervous yellow. "Calm down," Ethan said softly. He grabbed a small, jagged piece of quartz from a discard pile. He tapped it against the desk in a rhythmic pattern, 2 quick taps, 1 long. It was a crude imitation of a Lunari soothing purr. He had heard a mother use it once in the market. The kitten's ears perked up. It tilted its head. Ethan adjusted the lighting in the shop, dimming the harsh white LEDs and bringing up a soft, warm amber hue on the ambient strips. Amber was the color of safety in Lunari culture. "Is that better?" he asked. The kitten let out a soft huff of air. Its fur shifted from sickly yellow to a calmer lavender. It sat down, wrapping its tail around its paws, its eyes fixed on Ethan's hands. Ethan turned his attention to the toy. It was intricate, far more intricate than a child's toy had any right to be. The mechanics were sound, but the fracture in the crystal had disrupted the energy flow. A simple glue job would not work. The lumen would leak out and it would never fly again. He needed to refuse the crystal structure. He picked up a laser soldering tool, but then put it down. The heat would shatter the sunstone. There was only one way to fix this. He looked at the kitten. "You promised not to tell anyone." The kitten blinked slowly. Ethan took a deep breath. He placed his hands on either side of the toy, hovering just an inch above the surface. He closed his eyes. Focus. The world fell away. The gray darkness returned, and then the light bloomed. He saw the toy not as stone and metal, but as a frozen whirlpool of light. He saw the crack, a jagged black canyon running through the brilliant orange stream of the energy. The lumen was bleeding out of the wound, dissipating into the air. Ethan extended his senses. He did not use his hands. He used his mind. He imagined his will as a set of microscopic fingers, reaching into the energy field. He grabbed the frayed edges of the light and pulled. It required immense delicacy. If he pulled too hard, the crystal would explode. If he was too gentle, the bond would not hold. He had to match the frequency of the stone. He had to sing the same song as the crystal. A low hum began to rise in his throat. He did not mean to make the sound. It was an involuntary, sympathetic vibration. He purred, a deep, resonant rumble in his chest that matched the frequency of the sunstone. Under his mental touch, the black canyon in the light began to seal. The orange energy flowed back together, knitting itself into a seamless whole. The structure solidified. The heart of the toy reignited, flaring, with a brilliant, happy pulse. "So this is what you do on Thursday nights." Ethan jumped, his concentration shattering. The lumen vision vanished. He spun around. Arya was standing just inside the service entrance, the one he had forgotten to lock. She was leaning against the frame, her arms crossed, a look of absolute bewilderment on her face. "Arya," Ethan croaked. I was just—" "You were purring," Arya said flatly. "You were literally purring, as a cat." She looked at the kitten, then back at Ethan. "And you changed the atmospheric lighting to amber 6. That is the specific frequency for maternal bonding. How do you even know that?" Ethan stood up, trying to block the toy with his body. "I read a manual, once. Look, this kid just wandered in." "Kid?" Arya walked over, ignoring his attempt to block her view. She looked at the kitten. The kitten looked at her, then let out a demanding chirp and batted at Ethan's arm. "It wants the toy," Arya said. "Wait, is that a gravity dancer? Those are antique. Where did a stray pick up a—" She stopped. She looked at the toy on the bench. A moment ago, it had been a dead rock. Now it was glowing with a soft, rhythmic pulse. Ethan sighed. He picked up the top. "It was just a loose connection. I fixed it." He held the toy out to the kitten. "Here, good as new." He gave the top a gentle spin. It did not just spin, it sang. A clear, bell-like tone resonated through the room. The top lifted into the air, defying gravity. It spun faster and faster, dissolving into a blur of golden light. It rose to the ceiling, then swooped down in a perfect arc, leaving a trail of sparkling dust in the air like a miniature comet. The kitten let out a squeal of pure delight. It leaped into the air, batting at the comet, twisting its body with impossible grace. The toy danced around the kitten, responding to the child's movements, as if they were magnetic poles. It was magic. It was physics, yes, but it looked like magic. Ethan watched, a small smile cracking his stoic mask. Arya was not watching the cat. She was watching Ethan. Her eyes were wide, calculating, and filled with a sudden dawning suspicion. "That is not a loose connection, Ethan," she whispered. "That is resonant tuning, master-level tuning. I have seen high priests struggle to get a reaction like that from a sunstone." "I got lucky," Ethan said, wiping his hands on his rag to hide the tremors. Using the power always left him shaking. The kitten landed on the workbench. The top slowed and hovered gently above its head, spinning lazily. The baby Lunari looked at Ethan. Its fur rippled with a kaleidoscope of colors: pink joy, gold gratitude, and a deep, throbbing white trust. It stepped forward and head-butted Ethan's chest. It was a solid thump. The kitten rubbed its cheek against his vest, purring so loud it rattled the tools on the table. "Ah," Arya said, her suspicion momentarily forgotten. "She is scent-marking you. You are officially her property now." Ethan awkwardly patted the glowing creature. "Great. Just what I need. A landlord." The kitten pulled back, looked at him one last time with those giant golden eyes, then grabbed the hovering toy in its mouth. With a flick of its tail, it leaped off the bench, darted to the door, and tapped the release panel with a practiced paw. "Wait!" Ethan called out. "You cannot just—" The door opened, and the kitten vanished into the corridor. Ethan ran to the door, Arya close on his heels. They peered out. The hallway was empty. The purple glow was already fading around the corner toward the lift tubes. "Did that just happen?" Arya asked. "Or did I hallucinate a glowing space cat giving you a hug?" "It happened," Ethan said, rubbing the spot on his chest where the kitten had touched him. He looked down at his vest. There was a faint, glowing smudge of iridescent dust where the kitten's cheek had rubbed. It was fading, but for a moment he glowed. "You are weird, Ward," Arya said, punching him lightly on the arm. But her voice was warm. "A street artist for Martian cats. That is a new low even for you." Ethan chuckled, the sound rusty in his throat. "Do not tell anyone, all right? If people find out I do pro bono work, I will never get any peace." "Your secret is safe with me," Arya said. She looked at him for a moment longer, a question hanging on her lips, but she shook her head and smiled. "Good night, Ethan. Try to get some sleep. You look lit up." She turned and walked away toward her own quarters. Ethan watched her go, then stepped back into his shop and hit the lock. He leaned against the heavy metal door and slid down to the floor, putting his head in his hands. He had used the lumen. He had used it in front of Arya. She had not seen the energy threads, but she had seen the result. He had been careless. But as he sat there in the quiet shop, remembering the way the light had knit together, remembering the pure, unadulterated joy in the kitten's eyes, he could not bring himself to regret it. For 20 years, his power had been a curse, a scar from a storm that tried to kill him. Tonight, for 5 minutes, it had been a gift. He stood up and walked to the window to close the shutters. He looked out at the stars one last time. Below the planet, Tessera churned. Above the station slept. Ethan did not see the figure standing on the maintenance gantry outside his window. It was impossible for a human to be there without a void suit, but the figure was not human. It was massive, nearly 8 feet tall at the shoulder, with 4 powerful legs and fur that shimmered with the dark, majestic blue of the deep ocean. It clung to the hull of the station with magnetic grace, its silhouette blending perfectly with the shadow of the solar arrays. It was Sci-Fi, the matriarch, the High Queen of the Lunari. She was not looking at the stars. She was looking through the glass directly at the small human man who was washing his hands in a sink. She had felt the ripple in the lumen. She had felt the clumsy, powerful, strangely gentle fingers of a mind that should not exist reaching into the song of the sunstone. Her daughter, the Princess Lumi, had returned to the nursery moments ago, clutching the healed toy, radiating a scent that was alien, yet oddly harmonious. Sci-Fi narrowed her eyes. Her fur rippled with a deep, contemplative indigo. She did not raise the alarm. She did not summon her guards. She simply watched Ethan Ward turn off the lights. Interesting, the Queen thought, her mental voice a low rumble that vibrated in the vacuum. Very interesting. The human thought he was hiding. He had no idea that he had just lit a beacon that the entire royal court would soon be unable to ignore. Ethan went to bed dreaming of storms and broken glass, unaware that tomorrow, the quiet life he had built for himself was going to end. The next morning, the air in the workshop tasted like static electricity. Ethan woke up with a headache, a sharp throbbing pressure behind his left eye. It was the specific kind of headache he usually got before a solar flare or a reactor leak. He rolled out of his bunk groaning and checked the station's status display. All systems are nominal. Solar activity is low. Just a hangover from the adrenaline, he muttered to himself, splashing cold water on his face. He dressed in his standard gray jumpsuit, strapped on his tool belt, and went into the main workshop area. He expected a quiet morning. Maybe a coffee run. Maybe finishing the violin. What he found was an anomaly. The air in the shop was heavy, not with humidity, but with presence. He walked to his workbench. His tools were exactly where he had left them. The magnifying light was off. But on the surface of the table, right where the spinning top had been the night before, there was something new. It was a small, perfectly spherical crystal, no larger than a marble. It pulsed with a soft, rhythmic blue light. Ethan stared at it. He did not touch it. He reached out with his mind just a fraction. The crystal sang back. It was not a recording. It was a message. A single, pure note of gratitude, complex and layered with overtones of curiosity. It was a gift. From the kitten. Ethan felt a cold sweat break out on his neck. Lunari did not leave gifts for humans. They traded, they bought, they ignored. But this was a personal gesture. Before he could process what this meant, the comms unit on the wall buzzed. It was Arya. "Ethan!" Her voice sounded tight, urgent. "I am here," he said, staring at the blue marble. "What is wrong? Are you at the shop?" "Yes. Why?" "Do not open your door," Arya said. "I am coming to you." "But Ethan, look at the external monitors. Look at the corridor outside your sector." Ethan frowned. "Arya, what is going on?" "Just look." Ethan tapped the console, bringing up the security feed for the hallway outside his door. He stopped breathing. The corridor was not empty. It was filled with Lunari. There were dozens of them. Not just pilgrims or tourists. These were different. They wore ceremonial harnesses of silver and platinum. Their fur glowed with intense, synchronized patterns of respectful white and inquiring orange. They were sitting in rows, silent, facing his door. And in the center of the group, floating on a gravity disk, was an elder. An old Lunari, with fur the color of storm clouds, and eyes that looked like ancient nebulas. "What?" Ethan whispered. "What are they doing?" "They are waiting," Arya said, her voice crackling over the speaker. "The gossip chain is moving faster than light, Ethan. Someone saw the princess leave your sector last night with a restored royal artifact. They think you are a miracle worker." Ethan looked at the blue marble on his table. Then he looked at the army of expectant aliens outside his door. "I fixed a toy," Ethan said, panic rising in his chest. "I just fixed a toy." "Well," Arya said, "according to the Whisper Network, you did not just fix a toy. You healed a piece of the Neuralis heart. Ethan, who exactly are you?" Ethan cut the connection. He backed away from the door, as if it were radioactive. The blue marble pulsed faster. The headache behind his eyes spiked. The quiet days were over. The storm had found him again. The crowd of Lunari pilgrims outside Ethan's door eventually dispersed. but the silence they left behind was heavy with expectation. Over the next 7 days, the anonymity Ethan had carefully constructed for 2 decades began to erode grain by grain. It started with the kitten. Lumi, as Arya had named her short for luminance, a name that felt both scientifically accurate and affectionately domestic, decided that Ward's repairs and restorations was her secondary nursery. She did not care about the political tension or the whispers in the corridors. She only cared that Ethan's workshop smelled like ozone and warm metal, and that his hands could fix the things that puzzled her. She returned every day. Sometimes, she came alone, slipping through the ventilation ducts like a purple shadow. Other times, she was escorted by a very stressed, very polite Lunari guardian, who would stand stiffly by the door, radiating a nervous gray light, while the princess of the spire played with a box of washers. Lumi brought him things. At first, Ethan thought they were just trinkets. She dragged in a necklace made of woven silver light fibers that was flickering dully. She brought a wind chime carved from singing glass that had gone mute. "It is just junk jewelry," Ethan muttered on the third day, turning the necklace over in his hands. The guardian by the door stiffened, but said nothing. Arya, who had set up a temporary workspace on the far end of Ethan's bench, under the pretense of linguistic observation, looked up from her datapad. "It is not junk, Ethan. That is a resonance collar. It helps young Lunari regulate their emotional projection. If it is broken, she probably feels like she is shouting every time she tries to whisper." Ethan looked at the kitten. Lumi was sitting on his anvil, her fur flashing a chaotic mix of red and orange. She looked frustrated. Ethan sighed and put on his magnification goggles. He dropped his mental shields just a fraction enough to see the energy, but not enough to let the noise of the station overwhelm him. Under his gaze, the necklace transformed. It was not jewelry. It was a complex dampening field generator disguised as art. The internal lattice was twisted, blocking the flow of lumen. It was a delicate instrument more precise than a starship navigation computer, and someone had let it get clogged with psychic static. "Hold still," Ethan murmured to the kitten. He did not use tools this time. He used a tuning fork made of pure titanium and his own intuition. He struck the fork, pressed it to the metal clasp of the collar, and pushed a thought of calm, flowing water into the metal. The knot in the energy field loosened. The necklace flared with a soft, steady blue light. Lumi let out a trill of relief, the chaotic red in her fur fading to a contented lavender. She hopped off the anvil, trotted over to Ethan, and head-butted his shin before snatching the necklace and putting it on. "You are spoiling her," Arya said, though her voice was thick with amusement. "I am performing a service," Ethan corrected, wiping his hands. "She pays me in purrs. The exchange rate is terrible." "You love it," Arya teased. She stood up and walked over to him, leaning against the workbench. Her presence was a different kind of gravity. Where the Lunari were ethereal and buzzing with energy, Arya was solid. She smelled of coffee and old paper. "They are calling you the cat whisperer on the station net, you know. There is a betting pool on whether you are secretly a Lunari in a human suit." "I am human," Ethan said, looking down at his tools. "Boringly, disappointingly human." "There is nothing boring about you, Ethan Ward," Arya said softly. The teasing edge had vanished. "You fix things that the high priests say are unfixable. You understand their technology better than I understand their verbs. Why do you hide down here? You could be head of xenotechnology. You could be rich. You could be famous." Ethan picked up a screwdriver, turning it over and over in his fingers. The question made his chest tight. It touched the scar that the Heartstorm had left on his soul 20 years ago. "I do not want to be famous," he said, his voice low. "Famous people are used. Famous people are put on pedestals, and when they fall, they break. I like this." He gestured to the cluttered shop. "I like fixing things that people touch and then forget. A toaster, a violin, a child's toy. When I fix a violin, the musician plays it and the audience hears the music, not the repairman. I want to be the background noise, Arya. It is safer in the background. Arya watched him for a long moment. She did not push. She did not tell him he was wrong. She simply reached out and placed her hand over his, stopping the restless spinning of the screwdriver. "The background is nice," she said, "but sometimes the music needs a conductor." The moment hung between them, fragile and terrifying. Ethan felt the warmth of her hand seeping into his skin, grounding him in a way the lumen never could. He wanted to turn his hand over to lace his fingers with hers, but the fear was a reflex he could not unlearn. He pulled his hand away gently, pretending to reach for a rag. "I have work to do. The ventilation in Sector 7 is acting up again." Arya withdrew her hand, her expression unreadable. "Right. Sector 7. I will see you later, Ethan." While Ethan tried to maintain his small life, the station around him was beginning to fray. It was subtle at first. A flicker in the holographic billboards. A momentary drop in the artificial gravity that made everyone's stomach lurch. But to Ethan, who felt the station's energy like a second pulse, it was screaming. The flow of lumen through the spire's crystalline skeleton was becoming erratic. It was usually a smooth river of light, fed by the planet Tessera below. Now it was choppy. There were eddies and riptides in the energy. He felt it in his teeth. He felt it in the headaches that woke him up at 3 in the morning. And he was not the only one. The infirmary reports showed a 300% increase in migraines among the human population. The Lunari were faring worse. Their bioluminescence was dulling. There were reports of night terrors, mass hallucinations in the communal sleeping dens, where Lunari claimed they could hear the planet screaming. Ethan tried to ignore it. He told himself it was just solar activity. He told himself it was the seasonal shift in Tessera's storms. But he knew better. 4 days after the necklace incident, the Spire hosted the Festival of Harmonious Spheres. It was a weekly event held in the Great Glass Plaza, a massive observation deck with a transparent floor that looked directly down into the swirling blue eye of the giant planet. Ethan avoided these events usually, but Arya had insisted. "You need to get out of the cave," she had argued, practically dragging him by the sleeve of his dress jacket. "Lumi is going to be there. It is her first public appearance since the incident. She wants her favorite human to be there." So Ethan stood near the back of the plaza, holding a glass of sparkling water, feeling uncomfortable in his stiff collar. The plaza was packed. Humans in formal wear mingled with Lunari adorned in ceremonial crystals. The air was filled with the soft chiming of glass instruments and the low, thrumming purr of 100 conversations. In the center of the room, a small orchestra was setting up. They were a mixed group, human cellists and Lunari percussionists, who played by striking resonance bowls with their tails. Suddenly, the crowd parted. Neuralis guards, their fur glowing a stark warning, white, marched into the room. Behind them came the elders, led by a tall, imposing figure that Ethan recognized from the news feeds. Kaelor, the High Priest. Kaelor's fur was a deep, uncompromising gray, and he looked at the humans in the room with an expression that bordered on disdain. And then, scampering behind the solemn procession, came Lumi. She looked tiny among the adults. She was wearing the collar Ethan had fixed, and it glowed with a steady, reassuring blue. When she saw Ethan across the room, her ears perked up. She let out a happy chirp that cut through the ceremonial silence and made to run toward him. Kaelor placed a heavy paw on her shoulder, stopping her. He said something in the Lunari tongue, a series of sharp clicks and growls. Lumi's ears flattened. She sat down, looking dejected. Ethan felt a spike of anger. She is a child, he thought. Not a prop. The music began. It was a traditional piece, a song of orbit. The cello provided a deep, grounding rhythm, while the Lunari bowls sang a high, wavering melody that was meant to mimic the winds of Tessera. It was beautiful. But to Ethan, it sounded wrong. The cello was perfectly in tune, but the Lunari bowls were off. They were vibrating at a frequency that clashed with the ambient lumen of the station. It was like hearing two radio stations playing at once. Ethan winced, rubbing his temple. Suddenly, Lumi stood up. She was trembling. The light in her fur began to spike, not with fear, but with intensity. She opened her mouth and a sound came out that was not a cry. It was a note. A pure, piercing tone that matched the frequency of the bowls. The toy, the spinning top Ethan had fixed, which was floating near her, suddenly flared with blinding white light. The music stopped. The musicians froze. Lumi did not stop. She was caught in a feedback loop. The energy from the station was pouring into her, amplifying through the collar and discharging into the toy. "Lumi," Arya gasped, taking a step forward. "Stay back," Kalor barked in common, his voice booming. "Do not touch her. It is the first resonance." The toy spun faster and faster, becoming a blur. Then, with a crack like thunder, it expanded. It did not explode. It unfolded. A hologram erupted from the crystal core of the toy. It was massive, filling the center of the plaza. But it was not a static image. It was a three-dimensional map of complex, shifting geometric shapes that looked like a star chart superimposed over a musical score. And it was singing. The hologram emitted a complex polyphonic melody that vibrated the glass floor beneath their feet. It was a desperate, urgent song. The Lunari in the room gasped and fell to their knees. Even the humans who did not understand the religious significance stepped back in awe. Ethan did not step back. He stepped forward. He knew that sound. He had heard it 20 years ago in a cave while his world was ending. It was the sound of a heart storm. But this was different. It was inverted. It was not a song of destruction. It was a song of holding on. "It is a stabilizer code," Ethan whispered, his voice lost in the din. The hologram flickered. Lumi cried out, her small body arching, as the energy became too much for her. The map began to distort, turning red. "She cannot hold it," Ethan said louder. "The frequency is too high." He did not think. He moved. "Ethan, no," Arya shouted. Ethan ignored her. He ignored the guards who bristled as he approached. He ignored Kalor's roar of outrage. He walked up to the trembling kitten and the spinning sunstone. The air around them was hot with ionization. He could feel the lumen tearing at his skin, trying to get in. He knelt down beside Lumi. He did not touch her, that would interrupt the flow. Instead, he reached out and grabbed the sound itself with his mind. He hummed, a low, grounding D-flat. He poured his own stability into the chaotic field. He visualized the jagged red lines of the hologram smoothing out into blue curves. He became the anchor. Lumi's eyes snapped open. She saw him. She leaned into his presence, borrowing his strength. The hologram stabilized. The image sharpened. For 10 heartbeats, the entire plaza saw a clear, detailed image of the Aurora Spire's central core, with a pulsing red fracture line running through the main energy conduit. Then, the energy dissipated. The toy dropped to the floor. Lumi collapsed, panting, her light dimming to a sleepy gray. Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. Ethan stood up, his legs shaking. He looked around. Every pair of eyes in the room, human and alien, was fixed on him. Kalor stared at him with a mixture of horror and awe. "You," the elder hissed. "You touch the royal resonance, a human. It is heresy." "It is engineering," Ethan rasped, his throat raw. "And your station is broken." The aftermath was a blur of shouting security escorts and sterile conference rooms. Ethan was not arrested thanks to Arya's intervention and the sudden, fierce protection of the Queen's guards, but he was not free. He was confined to a guest suite in the diplomatic sector. 2 hours later, the door opened. Arya walked in. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were blazing. "Pack your things," she said. Ethan sat up on the couch. "Am I being evicted?" "No. You are being promoted, or conscripted." I am not sure which. She threw a datapad onto the table. The council saw the hologram, the red line. The engineers checked the main conduit. There is a microfracture in the primary containment field. If it had gone unnoticed for another week, the spire would have detonated. Ethan rubbed his face. So I saved the day. Can I go home now? No, Arya said sharply. Because the hologram was not just a warning. It was a key. That melody, it is a cipher. The Lunari archives have thousands of recordings like it, but they cannot decode them. They think it is the lost language of the architects. She crossed the room and stood in front of him. They have formed a task force. Dr. Vane, the head of science, is leading it. They invited me to handle linguistics. Good for you, Ethan said. I told them I would not do it unless you were on the team, Arya said. Ethan froze. Arya, no, I cannot. You are the only one who heard the stabilizer code, Ethan. Arya's voice rose. I watched the recording. You did not just hum along. You counterbalanced the frequency. You understood the data before the computer did. She sat down next to him, her voice dropping to a whisper. I know you are hiding something. I know you have secrets. But whatever ability you have, we need it. Lumi needs it. Ethan looked at her. He saw the worry in her eyes, but also the trust. She did not look at him like a freak. She looked at him like he was the only person who made sense. If I do this, Ethan said slowly, people will ask questions. Kaelor already looks at me like I am a demon. Let him look, Arya said fiercely. I will handle Kaelor. You just handle the noise. The lab was a high-security acoustic chamber deep in the spire's research sector. It was lined with sound-dampening foam and filled with enough computing power to run a starship. For the next 3 days, it became their world. It was just Ethan and Arya. The other scientists came and went, but the real work happened when the door was locked. They sat side by side at the main console. The air was cool and smelled of recycled oxygen and Arya's vanilla shampoo. They were analyzing the recording of Lumi's song, breaking it down, millisecond by millisecond. Here, Arya said, pointing to a waveform on the screen. See that dip? That is not a musical rest. That is syntax. It is a verb. Ethan leaned in. His shoulder brushed against hers. Neither of them moved away. It is not a verb, Ethan murmured, his eyes tracking the flow of the energy signature. It is a breath. It is the intake before a high note. Look at the harmonic resonance. It is shaped like a... He hesitated. Like a heartbeat. Arya turned her head. Their faces were inches apart. He could count the freckles on the bridge of her nose. A heartbeat, she repeated softly. The station, Ethan said, his voice husky. The song is trying to sync with the heartbeat of the planet below. The Lunari do not just build structures. They grow them. The spire is alive, Arya, and it is in pain. He reached for the controls to isolate the track, and his hand covered hers on the dial. The world seemed to stop. The hum of the servers faded. The flashing lights of the console blurred. All Ethan was aware of was the warmth of her skin and the scent of her hair. Arya did not pull away. She turned her hand over, interlacing her fingers with his. Her grip was firm grounding. You really can hear it, can you not? She whispered. Everything. Yes, Ethan confessed. It is loud. It is always so loud. Except when I am with you. With me. You are, Ethan searched for the words. You are quiet, not silent, just harmonious. You do not have jagged edges. Arya's eyes softened. A blush crept up her neck. She leaned in closer, her gaze dropping to his lips. That is the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me in a soundproof room. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted it more than he had wanted anything in 20 years. He started to lean in, closing the distance. The door slammed open. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers. Kaelor stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 other elders. His face was a mask of thunderous disapproval. "This is unacceptable," Kalor announced, his voice echoing in the small room. Human hands touching the sacred data, mingling with it. Arya stood up, smoothing her lab coat instantly, shifting from vulnerable woman to diplomat. "High Priest Kalor, we were analyzing the syntax of the—" "You were contaminating it," Kalor spat. He pointed a trembling claw at Ethan. "He is an abomination. I can smell the wrongness on him. He vibrates with a stolen frequency. He is not a listener. He is a thief." Ethan stood up slowly. The accusation hit close to the mark. Stolen frequency. Was that what his power was? A stolen piece of the storm. "I am trying to help," Ethan said, his voice steady, despite his fear. "The spire is unstable, Kalor. You know it. You can feel it in your fur." "The spire is testing us," Kalor countered. "It is rejecting the foreign presence. It is rejecting you. The princess is young and impressionable. She mistook your trickery for connection. But I will not let you corrupt the song of the spire." He stepped forward, looming over Ethan. "You will cease this investigation. You will return the artifacts. And you will leave the royal sector." "Or what?" Arya challenged, stepping between them. "Or I will declare you enemies of the faith," Kalor said coldly. "And on this station the faith holds the keys to the airlocks." He turned and swept out of the room, leaving a vacuum of cold silence behind him. Ethan sank back into his chair. His hands were shaking again. "He is scared," Arya said, her voice shaking with rage. "He is an old man terrified that he cannot hear the gods anymore, so he blames the person who can." "He is right, though," Ethan said miserably. "I am a contaminant. I am making things worse just by being here." "Stop it," Arya snapped. She grabbed his shoulders and spun his chair around to face her. "Do not let him win. You are not leaving." "Maybe I should," Ethan said. He stood up gently, removing her hands. "I need some air. I need to think." "Ethan, just give me an hour, Arya, please." He walked out of the lab before she could stop him. He needed to get away from the complex, away from the expectations, away from the tantalizing, terrifying possibility of her love. Ethan walked toward the lower maintenance decks. He needed the noise of the machinery to drown out his thoughts. He walked until he reached Sector 9, a desolate stretch of corridor near the outer hull. It was quiet here. The viewports looked out onto the dark side of Tessera. He leaned his forehead against the cold glass teal. Why did I fix the toy, he asked himself. Why did I reach out? He knew why. Because the kitten was crying. Because the music was broken. Because he was tired of being alone in the dark. But Kalor was right. The tensions were rising. The Lunari were looking at humans with suspicion. If he stayed, he would be the spark that ignited a civil war on the station. I should pack, he decided. I will take the next transport to the belt, disappear again. He pushed himself off the window. And then the floor disappeared. It was not a metaphor. The artificial gravity generator in Sector 9 failed instantly. Ethan floated up, flailing, grabbing a handrail to anchor himself. Then, the gravity slammed back on triple strength. He hit the deck hard, the breath knocked out of him. Boom! A sound like a planetary hammer striking a bell resonated through the entire station. The metal groaned. The lights in the corridor flared blindingly bright white, then blew out, plunging the sector into darkness. Emergency red strobes began to pulse. Warning, the station's automated voice droned slow and warped. Structural integrity compromised. External wavefront detected. Ethan scrambled to his feet, ignoring the pain in his ribs. He looked out the viewport. The view had changed. The planet Tessera was no longer just a storm of clouds. It was glowing. A ring of violet fire had ignited around the equator of the gas giant. And from that ring, a tendril of pure, chaotic light was reaching out straight for the Aurora Spire. Ethan felt the cold dread wash over him. It was the same color as his nightmares. A heartstorm. A massive one. His comms unit buzzed. It was Arya. All he could hear was static and a single shouted word. Ethan. Then the connection died. The floor beneath him buckled. The song of the spire changed from a hum to a shriek. Ethan did not run for the escape pods. He turned and ran toward the lift tubes, toward the royal sector, toward the center of the scream, because he knew with terrifying clarity that he was the only one who could sing back. The lift tube was a vertical coffin of screaming metal. Ethan Ward pressed his back against the glass wall, his hands clamped over his ears, though he knew it would do no good. The noise was not coming from the air. It was coming from the structure itself. The Aurora Spire was singing a death aria. Below him, through the transparent floor of the lift, the view was apocalyptic. The planet Tessera, usually a soothing canvas of blue and indigo clouds, had transformed. A violet cyclone, thousands of miles wide, was churning in the upper atmosphere. This was the Heartstorm. It was not wind and rain. It was a magnetic maelstrom of raw lumen energy, a terrestrial seizure reaching up with claws of lightning to drag the station down. The lift shuddered violently, grinding against the magnetic rails. The lights flickered and died, leaving Ethan in the red wash of the emergency strobes. "Come on," he hissed through gritted teeth. "Hold together. Just a little longer." He did not need a diagnostic panel to know what was happening. He could feel the station's agony in his own bones. The primary trusses in Sector 4 were vibrating at a D minor frequency that suggested imminent buckling. The thermal couplings in the lower habitation ring were wailing a high, sharp note of shear stress. But the loudest sound, the one that made his vision blur, was coming from the royal sector above. It was the resonance core, the massive crystal heart that kept the spire in geosynchronous orbit. It was not singing. It was shrieking. It sounded like a violin string being tightened by a giant hand, winding higher and higher seconds away from snapping. The lift slammed to a halt at the Royal Promenade. The doors hissed open, only halfway jammed by a warped track. Ethan squeezed through the gap, tearing the sleeve of his jumpsuit. The promenade, usually a place of silent contemplation and floating gardens, was a disaster zone. The gravity here was fluctuating wildly. One moment Ethan felt heavy as lead. The next he was nearly weightless. Shards of ornamental crystal, shaken loose from the ceiling, floated in the air like deadly confetti. The air smelled of ozone and burned cinnamon, the scent of stressed lunari biology. "Arya!" Ethan shouted, his voice swallowed by the roar of the storm. He pushed forward, dodging a floating bench. He opened his mind, dropping the shields he had maintained for 20 years. The world exploded into color. The physical wreckage faded. Ethan saw the promenade as a turbulent ocean of energy. The Heartstorm was battering the station's shields, sending shockwaves of jagged purple light through the walls. But amidst the chaos, he saw a distinct, terrified pulse. It was a warm, human orange flickering desperately next to a small, blindingly bright star of white gold. Arya and Lumi. He ran. He sprinted past the Hall of Ancestors, where the statues of past queens seemed to weep tears of liquid light. He turned the corner toward the entrance of the resonance chamber. They were there. The entrance to the chamber was blocked by a fallen pillar of obsidian. Arya was huddled behind it, one arm wrapped protectively around a shivering Lumi. Arya looked bad. Her lab coat was torn, and there was a dark, wet stain spreading on her shoulder. A shard of blue crystal, sharp as a scalpel, was embedded in the flesh of her upper arm. "Arya!" She looked up, her face pale and streaked with dust. When she saw him, relief washed over her features, followed immediately by terror. "Ethan, get back. The dampeners are gone." Ethan skidded to a halt beside them, dropping to his knees. He ignored the warning. He reached out to check her shoulder, his hands hovering over the wound. "I am fine," Arya grit out, though she flinched. "It hit the muscle, missed the artery. But Lumi—" Ethan looked at the kitten. The princess was curled into a tight ball in Arya's lap. Her fur was completely white, the color of absolute sensory overload. She was not crying. She was catatonic. The sheer volume of the lumen energy was frying her young nervous system. "She is caught in the feedback loop," Ethan said, his voice shaking. He placed a hand on Lumi's head. The heat radiating from her was intense. "The storm is trying to ground itself through her." "We have to get her to the core," Arya said, wincing, as a tremor shook the floor. "Kaelor is in there. He locked himself in. He thinks he can sing the storm down alone." "He is a fool," Ethan growled. "He is singing against the wind. He will shatter the station." Another shockwave hit. The obsidian pillar groaned and shifted. Above them, a spider web of cracks appeared in the transparent, aluminum ceiling, revealing the swirling violet horror of the planet below. "Can you walk?" Ethan asked. "If you help me," Arya said. She tried to stand, but her knees buckled. Ethan caught her, wrapping his arm around her waist. She felt fragile against him, but her eyes were hard as flint. "Do not drop me, Ward." "Never," Ethan promised. "Ethan." He scooped Lumi up with his other arm, pressing her small, hot body against his chest. "Hold on." They moved toward the chamber doors. The massive blast shields were sealed, glowing red with heat. "Open!" Ethan shouted, not at the mechanism, but at the metal itself. He pushed a pulse of command frequency into the locking system. The doors resisted. They were locked from the inside. "Kaelor," Arya screamed, banging on the hot metal with her good hand. "Open the door. You are killing us." There was no answer, just the rising, hysterical scream of the core inside. Ethan closed his eyes. He could feel the locking mechanism, a series of magnetic tumblers. He could feel Kaelor's influence on them, a stubborn, rigid knot of will holding them shut. Ethan did not finesse it. He did not ask politely. He gathered every ounce of his fear, every decibel of the storm raging inside him, and he shoved. Open. The magnetic seals shattered with a sound like a gunshot. The doors blasted open, sliding into the walls with a shriek of tortured metal. A blast of wind and light hit them, nearly knocking them off their feet. They stepped into the resonance chamber. It was a cathedral of light. The room was circular, dominated by a central shaft that dropped down through the floor, seemingly connecting the station directly to the planet below. Suspended in the center of the shaft was the heart of the spire, a crystal the size of a house faceted with 1,000,000 perfect cuts. Usually the heart pulsed with a gentle rhythm. Now it was vibrating so fast it was a blur. Arcs of lightning were jumping from the crystal to the walls, scorching the ancient tapestries. And there, standing on the gantry extending toward the crystal, was Kaelor. The high priest was strapped into a resonance harness, his arms raised high. He was chanting a deep, guttural roar that fought against the storm. But he was losing. His fur was singed, his eyes were wild, and blood was trickling from his ears. "Kaelor!" Ethan yelled, dragging Arya onto the gantry. The wind here was deafening. "Stop. You are off key. You are making it worse." Kaelor spun around. When he saw them, his face twisted in a snarl of righteous madness. "Get back!" the elder roared. "Heretics, you brought this. Your discord summoned the storm." "You did this," Ethan shouted back, pointing at the crystal. "I can hear it, Kaelor. I can hear what you did. You tightened the southern harmonic couplings. You tried to create a minor dissonance to blame on the humans, didn't you? Just a little vibration to scare the council. But the storm hit, and now your little trap has become a bomb," Kaelor faltered. The truth hit him like a physical blow. He lowered his arm slightly. I only wanted to protect the purity." "There is no purity in a graveyard," Arya yelled, clutching her bleeding shoulder. "Look at the monitor. The cascade failure is at 90%. If the crystal shatters, the explosion will crack the planetary crust. You will not just kill us. You will kill Neuralis." "It is the will of the Lumen," Kaelor screamed, tears streaming down his face. "We must endure, only the worthy survive the song." He turned back to the crystal and began to chant again, louder, more desperate. He was forcing a rigid square-wave chant onto a chaotic fluid storm. The crystal screamed in protest. A large crack appeared on its surface. "He is going to break it," Ethan whispered. The realization was cold and absolute. "Ethan," Arya said, pulling on his sleeve. "Do something. Use the voice. Use the hum." "I cannot," Ethan said, panic rising in his throat. "It is too big. This is a planetary storm, Arya. I fix toasters. I fix violins. I cannot fix a planet." "You are not a mechanic." Arya grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. Her eyes were fierce, burning with a belief that terrified him. "Stop pretending to be small. I heard you in the lab. I saw you with Lumi. You are not a mechanic, Ethan. You are a conductor. Now conduct." Ethan looked at her. He looked at the trembling kitten in his arms. He looked at the dying station. Something inside him, the wall he had built around the 12-year-old boy who touched the storm, crumbled. He handed Lumi to Arya. "Stay behind me." Ethan walked out onto the gantry. The wind tore at his clothes. The heat was blistering. He walked until he was standing right behind Kaelor. "Move," Ethan said. Kaelor ignored him. Ethan reached out and grabbed the Elder's harness. He did not use his strength. He used his leverage. He yanked Kaelor back, throwing the massive Lunari onto the metal grating. "I said move!" Kaelor scrambled up, claws extended. "Do not touch the song, human. You have no right. You are soul deaf. I am not deaf." The scream tore out of Ethan's throat, louder than the storm, louder than the crystal. It was a raw human sound of 20 years of frustration. "I hear it!" Ethan shouted, advancing on the priest. "I hear everything. I hear the structural stress in the bolts under your feet. I hear the fear in your heartbeat. I hear the song of the nebula 3 sectors away. I have heard it every second of every day since I was a child." He slammed his hand against his own chest. "You think this is a gift? It is a curse. I hid it because I wanted silence. I wanted to be normal. But because of your pride, because you had to prove a point, I have to step into the fire again." Kaelor stared at him, stunned into silence. The raw power of Ethan's confession seemed to push back the wind for a second. Suddenly, the air above the crystal shimmered. A massive hologram materialized. It was Sci-Fi the Queen. She was not on the station. She was projecting from the temple on the planet's surface, from the eye of the storm itself. Her image was distorted, flickering with static, but her voice was thunder. "Kaelor." The elder fell to his knees. "Matriarch, I am purging the—" Silence. The Queen's eyes, giant and glowing with ancient power, turned to Ethan. She looked at him, really looked at him with a gaze that stripped away his flesh and saw the burning energy beneath. The tone, Sci-Fi's voice, vibrated in their minds. "I hear the old tone in him, the legend of the listener from afar." She looked at Ethan. "Humans. You claim to hear the song. Can you hold the melody? I do not know," Ethan yelled back, looking up at the giant projection. "I have never tried to tune a hurricane." Then learned, Sci-Fi commanded. "The temple is ready to receive the countersong. But we have no bridge. The spire is the bridge. If you fall, we all burn, Kaelor." The elder flinched. "Yes, my queen." "You have forgotten the first rule of the lumen. It flows. It does not freeze. You tried to dam the river. Now you will help the human guide it. Or you will be stripped of your crystals and cast into the void." Kaelor looked at Ethan. The hatred was still there, but beneath it was shame and fear. He bowed his head. "I obey." Ethan turned to face the crystal. The crack was widening. The sound was deafening, a screeching, discordant wail that felt like a drill in his teeth. "Okay," Ethan muttered. "Okay. Think like an engineer. Feel like a musician." He turned to Arya. "I need you." "I am here," she said, stepping up beside him, ignoring the blood on her arm. "I need a translator," Ethan said rapidly. "I am going to find the frequency of the storm. I need to invert it, but I cannot hold the rhythm and calculate the math at the same time. I will hum the tone. You translate it into the Lunari numerical syntax and scream it at Kalor. Kalor, you use the resonance harness to amplify that frequency back into the crystal. Do you understand? A human conducting a high priest, Kalor muttered bitterly. The ancestors are weeping. The ancestors can weep later, Ethan snapped. Right now start chanting the bass carrier wave. Low G. Now, Kalor took a deep breath and began a low, rumbling chant. It was shaky, but it was a foundation. Ethan closed his eyes. He stepped to the edge of the gantry. The heat from the crystal singed his eyebrows. He reached out. Don't fight it, he told himself. Don't build a wall, be the window. He let the storm in. It hit him like a physical train. The pain was blinding. His mind was flooded with the chaos of 1 billion tons of hydrogen spinning in a magnetic frenzy. He gasped, his knees buckling. Ethan! Arya's hand gripped his arm. It was a lifeline. Focus on my voice. You owe me dinner, remember, an expensive one. With real wine, not that synthetic stuff. Her voice was an anchor. It kept him from dissolving into the light. Ethan gritted his teeth and stood up. He listened to the chaos. He sorted through the noise. There, buried under the screeching, he heard the pattern. The storm was pulsing in a complex fractal rhythm. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. It was a corrupted waltz. It is a 7/8 time signature, Ethan shouted. Arya, the frequency is 440.2. Modulate to the key of E-flat. Arya instantly translated. Kalor Veritan Sul, E-flat resonance, 440. Kalor adjusted his chant. The deep rumble shifted pitch. The crystal shuddered. The lightning arcs calmed for a second, then flared up again, angrier. It is not enough, Ethan yelled. The signal is too weak. We need more power to push the inverted wave back down to the planet. I am at maximum output, Kalor roared. My voice cannot go higher. We need a lens, Ethan looked around desperately. We need something to focus the beam. Suddenly, a weight landed on his shoulder. It was Lumi. She had jumped from Arya's arms. She was standing on Ethan's shoulder, her claws digging into his jumpsuit. Her fur was standing on end, glowing with a brightness that hurt to look at. In her mouth, she held the toy, the spinning top. Lumi, no, Arya cried. It is too dangerous. But Lumi did not listen. She looked at the giant, cracking crystal heart. Then she looked at the tiny, spinning toy in her mouth. She understood. The toy was a piece of the ancient heart. It was a shard of the original source. It was a tuning fork for the planet. Lumi tossed the toy into the air. It did not fall. It hovered in the space between Ethan and the giant crystal. It began to spin. Ethan felt the change immediately. The toy was acting as a condenser. It was pulling the chaotic energy from the room and focusing it into a single, needle-thin point. She unlocked the keystone, Kalor whispered, staring. The royal prerogative. Ethan, Arya shouted. Now channel it through the toy. Ethan raised his hands. He did not touch the toy. He aimed his mind at it. He began to sing. It was not a word. It was a raw, pure tone. A sound that came from the deepest part of his memory from the moment he had touched the crystal as a boy. It was the sound of forgiveness. He poured everything he had into that note. His fear, his loneliness, his love for the quiet moments in his shop, his feeling of Arya's hand in his. The sound hit the toy. The toy amplified it 1,000 times. A beam of pure golden light erupted from the spinning top and struck the giant heart crystal. Boom! The sound was not an explosion. It was a chord. A perfect harmonious C major chord that resonated through every atom of the station. The violet lightning turned gold. The screeching stopped, replaced by a hum so beautiful it made Ethan weep. The crack in the giant crystal began to seal. The light flowed like water, filling the fissure, smoothing the surface. "Hold it," Ethan gasped. His vision was tunneling. Blood was running from his nose. Just a few more seconds. "Ethan, stay with me." Arya was shouting, her arm wrapped tight around his waist. "Do not let go. Stay here. You are Ethan Ward. You fix things." "I am fixing it." Below them on the planet, the storm bands began to unravel. The violet cyclone slowed, widened, and dissipated into soft blue clouds. The song of the spire shifted from a death rattle to a lullaby. The toy slowed down. It drifted gently back into Lumi's paws. The light in the room faded to a gentle ambient glow. The gravity stabilized. The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan stood there for a heartbeat, his hands still raised. He looked at the healed crystal. He looked at Arya, whose face was streaked with tears and dust. "Thursday," Ethan whispered. "I think I finally fixed the Thursday hum." His eyes rolled back in his head. His legs gave way. He collapsed. Arya caught him. They hit the floor together. "Ethan!" She shook him. "Ethan!" He did not answer. He was breathing, but it was shallow. His skin was cold. Kaelor unstrapped himself from the harness and stumbled over. He looked down at the unconscious human, then at the Queen, who was still watching from the fading hologram. "He lives," Serapha's voice whispered softer now, full of exhaustion and awe. The bridge held. Lumi crept forward. She curled up on Ethan's chest right over his heart. She began to purr. It was a healing purr, a deep, rhythmic vibration meant to knit bone and soothe spirit. Kaelor slowly knelt. He placed his hand on Ethan's forehead. For the first time, there was no disgust in his touch, only a profound, shaken respect. "The song is balanced," the elder murmured. He rewrote the score. Arya brushed the hair back from Ethan's sweaty forehead. She kissed his temple, her tears falling onto his face. "You idiot," she sobbed softly. "You absolute brilliant idiot. You better wake up. You owe me that dinner." The station drifted on, silent and safe, held in the gentle hand of a restored gravity. But the world had changed. The secret was out. The mechanic was gone. The listener had arrived. And the questions were just beginning. The first thing Ethan Ward became aware of was the sound. It was not the screaming of a dying space station, nor the discordant wail of a fracturing crystal. It was a rhythmic, wet sandpaper-like sound. Scrape, scrape, pause. Scrape, scrape, pause. He opened his eyes. The light in the room was a soft, sterilized white characteristic of the spire's medical wing. But his field of vision was dominated by a blurry purple blob. Ethan blinked his eyelids, feeling heavy and crusted with sleep. The blob sharpened into focus. It was Lumi. The princess of the Lunari was sitting on his chest, meticulously grooming the collar of his hospital gown with her rough tongue. "I am not a kitten," Ethan croaked, his voice sounding like he had swallowed a handful of gravel. "Stop cleaning me." Lumi paused mid-lick. She looked at him with her enormous golden eyes, blinked once, and then let out a chirp that sounded suspiciously like a scolding. She patted his cheek with a soft paw, then curled up under his chin and began to purr. The vibration went straight through his sternum, rattling his ribs in a way that was surprisingly comforting. "You are awake." Ethan turned his head. Sitting in a chair by the bedside, looking like she had not slept in 3 days, was Arya. She was still wearing the same clothes from the resonance chamber, though someone had cleaned the dust off her jacket and bandaged her shoulder properly. She held a datapad in her lap, but she was not looking at it. She was looking at him with an expression that hovered somewhere between relief and the urge to strangle him. "How long?" Ethan asked, trying to sit up. Lumi protested with a growl, forcing him to settle for propping himself up on one elbow. 36 hours, Arya said. She stood up and poured him a glass of water from a pitcher on the bedside table. "The doctors were worried. They said your neural pathways were scorched. They said you had absorbed enough lumen radiation to power a small shuttle." Ethan took the glass, his hand shaking slightly. The water was cold and tasted of minerals. "I feel fine, just fuzzy." "Fuzzy is good," Arya said, sitting back down. "Fuzzy means you are not dead." You cut it close, Ethan. You almost became a legend in the literal sense. Another few seconds in that trance, and you would have dissolved into pure light. We would have had to sweep you up with a vacuum. "Ha ha," Ethan deadpanned. "Very funny." He looked around the room. It was a standard recovery suite, but it looked like a toy store had exploded inside it. Every flat surface, the bedside table, the windowsill, the floor, even the foot of his bed was covered in Lunari artifacts. There were glowing glass spheres, twisted metal sculptures, broken wind chimes, and what looked like a pile of shiny rocks. "What is all this?" Ethan asked, gesturing to the hoard. Arya smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "Gifts. From Lumi. Every time she visited, which was about once every hour, she brought you something. I think she believes you eat broken electronics for sustenance. She dragged that harmonic dampener over there, all the way from the royal nursery by herself." Ethan looked at the pile of junk. To anyone else, it was trash. To him, he could see the faint, fading energy signatures in each object. They were broken things, discarded things, just like him. "She is a menace," Ethan muttered, scratching the kitten behind the ears. Lumi leaned into the touch, her fur flashing a contented pink. "She loves you," Arya said softly. "And she is not the only one. You should see the news feeds, Ethan. You are the human resonator, the savior of the Spire. There are already 3 unauthorized biographies of you being written, and one of them claims you are a secret government experiment." Ethan groaned, covering his face with his hands. "Please tell me you are joking." "I wish I was," Arya said. "The council is holding a press conference in 2 hours. They want to give you a medal, or a sash. I am not sure what the protocol is for saving a solar system." "I cannot do a press conference," Ethan said, panic rising in his chest. "I cannot do crowds. I fix things in the dark area. That is the deal." "The deal changed when you sang a duet with a planet," Arya said firmly. She reached out and squeezed his knee over the blanket. "But do not worry. We managed to talk them down. No press conference, just a private ceremony," the Queen insisted. "The Queen," Ethan repeated the memory of the giant hologram flashing in his mind. The listener from afar. "She spoke to me, inside my head." "She spoke to everyone," Arya said, "but she looked at you." The private ceremony was held in the Hall of Silence, a massive domed chamber at the very apex of the spire. The ceiling was a single pane of transparent aluminum, offering an unobstructed view of the cosmos. Tessera, now calm and beautiful again, filled the sky. There were no cameras, no reporters, just the High Council of the Lunari, a few human representatives including Dr. Vane Arya and Ethan. Ethan felt ridiculous. He had been forced into a formal dress uniform that was stiff at the collar and too tight across the shoulders. Lumi, who refused to be separated from him, walked proudly at his heel like a guard dog, wearing a small ceremonial cape that matched his sash. At the front of the hall, the air shimmered. The Queen did not appear in person. Her physical form was too large and energetic for the delicate environment of the upper spire, but her projection was life-sized and solid. Sci-Fi stood 10 feet tall, her fur a deep, regal midnight blue, her 4 eyes glowing with ancient wisdom. Beside her, kneeling on the cold floor, was Kalor. The high priest looked diminished. His silver harness was gone. His fur was dull and unkempt. He stared at the floor, his posture one of absolute defeat. "Ethan Ward," Seraph's voice, resonated through the room, not from speakers, but from the air itself. "Arya Solon, step forward." They stepped forward. Ethan tried to bow, felt awkward and stopped halfway. Arya performed a perfect diplomatic curtsy. "We do not stand on ceremony today," Sci-Fi said. We stand on survival. The Aurora Spire stands because of your actions. You bridged the gap that my own kind was too blind to see." She turned her gaze to Kalor. "High Priest Kalor." Kalor flinched. "My queen." "You sought to protect our traditions," Scifi said, her voice cool and level. "You believed that the purity of the lumen was fragile, that it needed to be walled off from those you deemed lesser. In doing so, you nearly destroyed the very thing you swore to guard. You introduced dissonance into the song." "I confess," Kalor whispered. "I was afraid. I thought the humans were noise. I did not know they could carry the tune." "Fear is not a crime," Scifi said, "but arrogance is. By our ancient laws, you should be stripped of your rank and exiled to the dust mines of the outer moons." Ethan felt a pang of pity. He looked at the old Lunari. He saw the energy field around Kalor. It was jagged gray and full of sorrow. "However," Scifi continued, "I have learned a lesson from the human Ethan Ward. He did not destroy the broken toy. He fixed it. He tuned it." She looked at Ethan. "Ethan Ward, you possess a raw, untamed connection to the lumen. You hear the song, but you do not know the notes. You act on instinct, which is powerful but dangerous. You need a teacher. You need to learn the grammar of the light." Ethan nodded slowly. "I barely understand what I did, Your Majesty. I just hummed." "Exactly," Scifi said. "Kalor." The High Priest looked up, confusion warring with his shame. "Your penance is not exile," Scifi declared. "Your penance is service. You will take Ethan Ward as your student. You will teach him the history, the theory, and the discipline of the lumen. You will show him how to control the storm within him. And in return, you will learn from him." "Learn from him," Kalor sputtered. "My queen, he is a mechanic." "He is the listener," Scifi said, her voice hardening. "And you, Kalor, have forgotten how to listen. You will learn humility. You will learn that the song has no borders. This is my judgment." Kalor slumped. He looked at Ethan. For a moment, the old hatred flared in his eyes, but it was quickly extinguished by the weight of the Queen's command. He bowed his head low. "I obey." Scifi turned back to Ethan. "Do not think this is a reward, human. Kalor is a strict master. He will not be kind. But if you survive his tutelage, perhaps you will understand who you truly are." The projection faded. The ceremony was over. As the crowd began to disperse, Kalor stood up stiffly. He walked over to Ethan. He loomed over the human, his shadow long on the floor. "Report to the resonance chambers at 0600 hours tomorrow," Kalor growled. "Do not be late, and wash your hands. You smell of grease and ignorance." "I look forward to it," Ethan said, meeting the alien's gaze evenly. "Teacher," Kalor snorted, his whiskers twitching, and stalked away. "Well," Arya said, coming up beside Ethan, "that went better than expected. At least he did not try to bite you." "Give it time," Ethan said, loosening his collar. "The semester has not started yet." Life on the Aurora Spire returned to a semblance of normalcy, but Ethan's life had irrevocably shifted. He was no longer just the repairman in the basement. He was a curiosity, a celebrity, and a student of the highest mysteries of the universe. Yet he fought tooth and nail to keep his routine. He insisted on keeping his shop open. "The toasters still break," he told the council when they offered him a stipend to stop working. "And the violins still need tuning." But his quiet workshop was quiet no more. Lumi had effectively moved in. She had her own cushion on his workbench. She had a bowl for her nutrient paste in the corner. She had decided that Ethan's tool belt was an excellent shoe toy. One afternoon, 3 weeks after the storm, Ethan was trying to recalibrate a holographic projector for a client. He reached for his micro screwdriver, but his hand grasped empty air. "Lumi," he sighed. He looked under the bench. The princess was lying on her back, batting the expensive, precision-engineered screwdriver between her paws, like a dead mouse. "That is a tool," Ethan said, crawling under the table to retrieve it. It is not prey, Lumi chirped defiantly and batted it under the heavy cabinetry. You are lucky you are royalty, Ethan grumbled, fishing for the tool with a magnet. Otherwise, I would put you in a crate and ship you to Mars. She knows you are lying, Arya said from the doorway. Ethan bumped his head on the table. He crawled out, rubbing his skull. Arya was leaning against the frame, holding 2 coffees. It had become their ritual. Every afternoon at 1500 hours, she brought coffee, and he pretended to complain about the interruption. She is a tyrant, Ethan said, accepting the cup. She sleeps in my violin cases. Do you know how hard it is to get glowing fur out of velvet lining? It is impossible. You love it, Arya said, taking her usual spot on the stool. Admit it. You like having a family. The word hung in the air. Family. Ethan looked at the kitten, who was now attacking a dust bunny with ferocious intensity. Then he looked at Arya. The sun from the window caught the red in her hair, turning it into a halo. I suppose it is better than silence, Ethan admitted softly. Speaking of silence, Arya said, her tone shifting to something more serious. How are the lessons with Kaelor going? Ethan grimaced. Grueling. He makes me meditate for 4 hours a day while holding a raw crystal. If my concentration wavers for a second, he hits me with a stick. A resonant stick. It does not hurt, but it makes my funny bone vibrate for 10 minutes. Is he teaching you anything real? Yes, Ethan said. He put down his coffee and picked up a scrap of metal from the bench. Watch. He held the metal in his palm. He closed his eyes. He did not hum this time. He just breathed. He focused on the memory of the metal, where it had been mined, the heat of the forge that shaped it. He felt the alignment of the atoms shift. The metal in his hand groaned. Without him squeezing it, the scrap bent slowly, folding over itself like soft clay, until it formed a perfect ring. Ethan opened his eyes. He tossed the ring to Arya. He says the lumen is not just energy, Ethan explained. It is memory. Everything in the universe remembers what it is supposed to be. If you know the language, you can remind it to be something else. Arya turned the cold metal ring in her fingers. That is incredible and terrifying. It is, Ethan agreed. Kaelor says I am a natural conduit. He says my nervous system is mutated. He asked me about my parents, about where I was born. Arya looked up sharply. What did you tell him? I told him the truth. I was born on Earth. Normal parents, normal childhood. Until the accident on Neuralis. Arya bit her lip. She reached into her bag and pulled out an old leather-bound book. It looked wildly out of place next to the holographic tools. I have been doing some reading, she said. In the deep archives, the ones Kaelor usually keeps locked. You broke into the Royal Archives? Ethan asked, impressed. I had clearance, mostly. Anyway, I found this. She opened the book to a marked page. It showed a woodcut illustration of a figure standing amidst a storm of swirling lines. The figure did not look like a Lunari. It had 2 legs, no tail. The Legend of the Listener, Arya read. It says that once every 1,000 cycles, when the great heart beats out of rhythm, a stranger will come from the void. A stranger who carries a shard of the first star in their soul. They will not speak the tongue of the Lunari, but they will hear the song of the stone. She looked at Ethan. It says the listener is not chosen. They are marked. Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Marked by what? By the heart itself, Arya whispered. Ethan, that day in the cave when you were 12. You touched the crystal. You said it screamed at you. Yes. What if it did not just scream? Arya asked. What if it planted something? What if the ability to hear the lumen is not a side effect of the radiation? What if it is a seed? Ethan looked at his hands. They looked like normal human hands. Scars from soldering irons. Calluses from violin strings. But when he looked deeper with his second sight, he could see the faint golden web of energy running under his skin mirroring his nervous system. "I do not know," Ethan said hoarsely. "And I am terrified to find out. Sometimes, when I am deep in the meditation, I forget I am human. I feel like I am just a vibration, a sound wave wearing a skin suit. If I stop concentrating, will I just disperse?" "No," Arya said firmly. She stood up and crossed the distance between them. She took his face in her hands. Her palms were warm, rough and real. "You are solid. You are Ethan. You drink too much coffee. You complain about Thursdays. You are real." "Am I?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. He felt untethered, drifting in the vastness of the implications. "Yes," Arya said. And then she kissed him. It was not a movie kiss. It was not a collision of stars. It was a grounding. It was a desperate, firm assertion of reality. Her lips were soft, tasting of cinnamon and caffeine. Ethan froze for a millisecond, and then he melted. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, burying his hands in her hair. He held on to her, like she was the only gravity in the universe. The kiss broke, leaving them both breathless. They rested their foreheads against each other. "See," Arya whispered. "Solid." Ethan laughed, a shaky, breathless sound. "Okay, solid. I can work with solid." "Good," Arya said, stepping back but keeping hold of his hand. "Because you owe me that dinner. And I am collecting tonight." The dinner was a disaster, but in the best possible way. They went to a small noodle shop in Sector 4 that overlooked the shipyards. They sat on the balcony, watching the cargo haulers dock. They talked about everything and nothing. Arya talked about growing up on a colony ship, always moving, never having a home. Ethan talked about his fear of becoming like Kaelor, rigid and alone. They laughed. They argued about which moon of Tessera was the prettiest. For a few hours, the prophecy and the politics faded away. But the universe had a way of intruding. As they walked back to Ethan's workshop hand in hand, a royal guard intercepted them. "Citizen Ward, Citizen Solon," the guard said, bowing stiffly. "The Queen requests your presence." "Now?" Ethan asked, checking his chrono. "It is 2200 hours." "The Queen does not sleep," the guard said simply. "And she says it is time." They followed the guard, not to the spire but to the hangars. A private shuttle was waiting, a sleek silver vessel with the royal crest. Kaelor was waiting by the ramp. He looked grim. "What is happening?" Arya asked. "The final lesson," Kaelor said to Ethan. He did not sneer. He sounded almost sad. "You have learned the form, student. Now you must learn the source." "Where are we going?" Ethan asked. "Down," Kaelor pointed to the planet below. "To Neuralis. To the Temple of the First Light." Lumi poked her head out of Kaelor's satchel. She chirped excitedly when she saw Ethan. "The princess must go as well," Kaelor said. "And the toy. The artifact is not just a tool, Ethan. It is a key." Ethan felt the dread coil in his stomach again. "A key to what?" "To the door you opened 20 years ago," Kaelor said. "You survived the touch of the crystal, but you never closed the connection. The Queen believes that is why the storms are still unstable. You are a loose wire in the planetary circuit." "And if I go down there?" Ethan asked. "What happens?" "Either you ground the circuit," Kaelor said, "or you burn out." Ethan looked at Arya. She squeezed his hand so hard, her knuckles turned white. "We go together," she said. Ethan looked at the shuttle, then at the planet swirling below. He realized that his quiet life was truly gone. He could not go back to fixing toasters. He had to fix himself. "Okay," Ethan said. "Let's go." The descent to Neuralis was smooth, a stark contrast to the turbulent memories Ethan held of his childhood crash. The shuttle pierced the cloud layers of Tessera, navigating the magnetic currents, like a fish swimming upstream. They landed on a high plateau, surrounded by jagged peaks of crystalline rock that glowed with an internal phosphorescence. The air was thin, but breathable, smelling of ozone and crushed mint. The Temple of the First Light was not a building. It was a cave. A massive, natural amphitheater carved into the side of the highest mountain. Sci-Fi was waiting for them at the entrance. In the flesh, she was terrifyingly magnificent. Her fur rippled with colors that human eyes could barely perceive. "Welcome," she said, her voice rumbling through the ground. "Welcome home, listener." Ethan stepped off the ramp. The moment his boots touched the ground, he felt it. The hum. On the station, it had been a distant melody. Here it was a roar. The entire planet was singing. It vibrated in his teeth and his blood. It was overwhelming. He staggered. "Steady," Kaylor said, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Do not fight it. Harmonize with it." Ethan took a breath. He matched his internal rhythm to the planet's pulse. Thump, 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 thump. The dizziness passed. "Come," Sci-Fi said. She led them deep into the cave. The walls were lined with thousands of glowing crystals, each one pulsing with a different rhythm. It was a library of light. "These are the memories of our ancestors," Arya whispered, her eyes wide. "It is a history book written in energy." They reached the central chamber. In the middle of the room, floating above a pool of liquid mercury, was a pedestal. And on the pedestal was an empty socket. "This is the heart of the temple," Sci-Fi said. "Long ago, the first star fragmented. One piece became the core of the spire. One piece stays here to anchor the planet." She pointed to the toy in Lumi's mouth. "And one piece," she said, "was lost. Stolen by the void, drifting for aeons until it found a small, terrified boy in a storm." Ethan stared at the toy. "Is this the third piece?" "Yes," Sci-Fi said. "When you touched the crystal in the cave all those years ago, you did not just touch a random rock. You touched this, the lost shard." "But the toy," Ethan stammered. "Lumi brought it to me. It was broken." "It was dormant," Sci-Fi corrected. "It was waiting for your touch. It recognized your biosignature. You carried the resonance of the shard in your blood for 20 years, Ethan Ward. That is why you can hear the lumen. You are not just a listener." She leaned down, her giant face inches from his. "You are a living storage vessel for the first light. The shard poured a part of itself into you to survive the crash. You are part crystal." Ethan felt the world tilt. "I am what?" "You asked if you were human," Sci-Fi said gently. "Biologically, mostly. But energetically, no. You are a hybrid, a bridge between flesh and light." Arya gasped. She grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling up his sleeve. She traced the faint, golden lines on his arm. "The web is not just nerves. It is circuitry." "Why didn't I know?" Ethan whispered. "Because you were afraid," Kaylor said. "You blocked it out. You built a wall of silence. But the wall is gone now." "So what do I do?" Ethan asked, looking at the empty socket on the pedestal. "Do I put the toy in there?" "If you place the shard in the socket," Sci-Fi said, "it will stabilize the planet permanently. The heart storms will cease. The spire will be safe forever." "That sounds good," Ethan said. "So let's do it." "There is a cost," Sci-Fi said. The silence that followed was heavy. "What cost?" Arya asked, her voice sharp. "The shard has bonded with you, Ethan," Sci-Fi said. "It has left a part of its essence in you. To reunite the shard with the planet, you must give that essence back." Ethan looked at her. "You mean I lose the ability? Will I go back to being normal?" "Yes," Sci-Fi said. "You will be fully human again. The hearing will stop. The headaches will stop. You will be silent." Ethan looked at Arya. He looked at Kaylor. He looked at Lumi, who was chasing her tail near the pool of mercury. Silence. It was what he had wanted for 20 years. To be normal. To fix a toaster without feeling its pain. To sleep without hearing the dreams of a space station. "But," Sci-Fi added, "if you give it back, the bridge breaks. You will no longer be able to translate the song. You will no longer be the listener. And without a listener who will warn us when the next dissonance comes, it was a choice. Save the planet now, and lose himself retreating into the safety of being just a mechanic. Or keep the power, keep the curse, keep the noise, and try to find another way to stabilize the world, a way that required him to be the bridge forever. Ethan looked at the socket. It looked like a mouth waiting to be fed. He looked at Arya. She was not telling him what to do. She was just holding his hand ready to support whatever he chose. Ethan closed his eyes. He listened. He heard the planet. It was chaotic, loud, and beautiful. He heard the spire orbiting above. He heard the heartbeat of the kitten. He realized something. He didn't hate the noise anymore, because now he knew the words to the song. Ethan opened his eyes. He picked up the toy from Lumi. "I won't put it in," Ethan said. Kaylor gasped. "You would doom us." "No," Ethan said. "I am not going to plug a hole with a piece of history. That is a patch job. I am an engineer, Kaylor. I do not patch. I will restore." He held the toy out to Arya. "Hold this," he said. Then he turned to the pool of mercury. "I am not going to give the light back," Ethan said, stepping toward the edge. "I am going to share it." He reached out his hands not to the socket, but to the liquid metal itself, the raw blood of the planet. "I am the bridge," Ethan said. "So let's build a highway." He plunged his glowing hands into the pool. The cliffhanger hung in the air, like the static charge before lightning. Ethan's hands were submerged. The liquid mercury began to bubble. The golden lines on his arms flared blindingly bright. Arya screamed his name, and the temple exploded into light. The light did not burn. It did not freeze. It simply enveloped. When Ethan Ward plunged his hands into the pool of liquid mercury in the antechamber of the temple, he expected to be torn apart by the raw energy of the planet. Instead, the world dissolved into a wash of pure, silent white. For a heartbeat that felt like a century, he was everywhere and nowhere. He was the wind sweeping across the crystal plains of Neuralis. He was the deep, rhythmic thrum of the planetary core. He was the static electricity clinging to Arya's jacket. Then, the white faded, and gravity reasserted itself with a gentle tug. Ethan blinked. He was still standing, but the environment had changed. The antechamber was gone. They had been transported deeper into the very heart of the mountain. They stood in a cavern so vast that the ceiling was lost in a haze of golden mist. The air here was different. It crackled with a magnetic density that made the hair on Ethan's arms stand up, yet it smelled sweet, like ozone and blooming night flowers. "Welcome," a voice rumbled, vibrating through the soles of Ethan's boots. To the nursery of stars, Ethan looked up. Looming above them was Sci-Fi. This was not the hologram he had seen on the spire, nor the projection in the Hall of Silence. This was the matriarch in the flesh. She was colossal, easily 15 feet tall at the shoulder. Her fur was a tapestry of living constellations, shifting from deep indigo to void black with every breath. Her 4 eyes, large as dinner plates, glowed with a terrifyingly ancient intelligence. Yet, as she lowered her massive head to look at them, her expression was not one of judgment, but of profound, weary gentleness. "My queen," Kaylor breathed, dropping to his knees so hard his armor clattered against the stone floor. He pressed his forehead to the ground, his tail tucked in absolute submission. Arya stood frozen, her hand gripping Ethan's arm, tight enough to bruise. Lumi, however, let out a happy chirp, leaped from Arya's shoulder, and bounded toward the giant creature. The kitten rubbed her tiny head against the queen's massive paw, purring like a diesel engine. "Peace, little spark," Sci-Fi murmured. Her voice sounded like cello strings played by a mountain. She nudged Lumi gently with one claw, then turned her gaze to Ethan. "You open the door, listener. You have passed the threshold." "I did not know there was a door," Ethan said, his voice echoing in the vast space. He looked at his hands. They were no longer glowing, but they felt warm humming, with a residual vibration. "Come," Serapha said, turning her massive bulk with surprising grace. "There is much you must see before the final choice is made." She led them through the cavern. As they walked, Ethan realized that the mist above them was not water vapor. It was falling light. Tiny particles of lumen were drifting down from the ceiling, like a slow, glowing snow. They entered a smaller chamber, though still large enough to house a starship lined with alcoves. In each alcove hung a crystal object. Ethan stopped. He recognized the shapes. There were spinning tops, mobiles of floating glass, rattles carved from sunstone, hoops that hummed when the air moved through them. "Toys," Arya whispered, stepping closer to a shelf. "They are all toys." "They are teaching tools," Serapha corrected gently. "To your eyes they seem like playthings. To us, they are the first primers of the lumen language. When a royal child is born, they are given a shard of the planetary heart shaped into a form they can hold. It teaches them to regulate their energy. It teaches them that power must be handled with joy, not just discipline." She walked to the center of the room where a single, empty pedestal stood. "And this," Serapha said, pointing to the toy that Lumi had carried, the gravity dancer that Ethan had fixed, "is the lost primer." Serapha looked at Ethan, her gaze piercing. "Do you know why this specific artifact is so powerful, Ethan Ward? Do you know why it was able to channel the song that saved the spire?" "Because it is a piece of the heart," Ethan said, remembering Kalor's words. "Yes, but it is not just any piece," Serapha said. She sat on her haunches, bringing her face level with the humans. "Thousands of years ago, the first great heartstorm threatened to tear Neuralis apart. To save the planet, the matriarch of that era made a desperate choice. She cast a piece of the unstable core out into the void, hoping to vent the excess pressure. That piece, this toy, drifted through the cosmos for centuries." Ethan felt a cold shiver crawl up his spine. He knew where this story was going. He could feel the truth of it resonating in his marrow. "It drifted," Serapha continued softly, "until it was caught by the gravity well of a small, uncharted moon, where a human colony ship had crash-landed. It lay buried in the ice for a generation, until a storm unearthed it, and a 12-year-old boy found it." Ethan stopped breathing. The memory hit him with the force of a physical blow. The cave, the storm, the terror, the singing rock. He hadn't just found a random crystal. He had found this. "I touched it," Ethan whispered. "I picked it up. It burned me." "It bonded with you," Serapha corrected. "It had been alone in the dark for an eon. It was starving for connection. When you touched it, it poured its essence into you. It did not want to hurt you, Ethan. It wanted to hide inside you. It wanted to go home." Ethan looked at the toy in Lumi's paws, the broken top, the thing he had fixed. "My power," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "The hearing, the ability to tune the crystals. It is not a mutation. It is not radiation." "No," Serapha said. "You are carrying a piece of the soul of Neuralis in your nervous system. You are a living vessel for the lost primer. When Lumi brought the toy to your shop, she was not just bringing a broken toy to a mechanic. She was bringing the empty shell to the only person in the universe who held the filling." Arya let out a sharp breath. "That is why the connection was so strong. That is why he could stabilize the spire. He was not just conducting the energy. He was the source." Ethan leaned against the wall, his legs feeling weak. The revelation rearranged his entire life. Every headache, every moment of isolation, every time he felt like a freak, it was all because he was walking around with a planetary fragment stitched into his soul. "You knew," Ethan said, looking up at the Queen. "You knew who I was." "I suspected," Serapha admitted. "I felt the anomaly in the song years ago, a human note in the Lunari chorus. But I did not know if you were a thief or a guardian." So you tested me, Ethan said, his voice hardening. Lumi, the broken toy, the crying child. It was a setup. It was a question, Serafa said calmly. I allowed my daughter to wander the lower levels. I knew that if the listener was true, if he was worthy of the power he carried, he would not be able to ignore a child in distress. A thief would have sold the crystal. A coward would have ignored it. Only a healer would have fixed it. And if I had failed, Ethan asked, anger flaring in his chest. If I had turned her away, then the storm would have come, Serafa said simply, and the spire would have fallen, and you would have perished with it, unknowing. That is cruel, Ethan snapped. You gambled thousands of lives on a morality test. Ethan, Arya warned softly, but Ethan ignored her. He stepped toward the giant queen. I am not a component in your machine, Ethan said, pointing a shaking finger at the matriarch. I spent 20 years thinking I was broken. I spent 20 years hiding. And you just watched. You waited until the last second to see if the lab rat could run the maze. Kaelor gasped. Human, you speak to the matriarch. Let him speak, Serafa rumbled. Her eyes did not narrow. They widened with a strange sorrow. I fixed the toy because she was crying, Ethan said, his voice cracking. Not because of your prophecy. Not because I wanted to save the world. Because a kid was sad. That is it. That is all I am. A guy who fixes things. And you turned that into a weapon. The silence in the cavern was absolute. The golden snow stopped falling. Then Arya stepped forward. She stood beside Ethan, her shoulder brushing his. She looked up at the queen, her chin high. He is right, Arya said clearly. Your Majesty, with all due respect to your wisdom, you treated him like a variable in an equation. But he is a person. He has scars. He has nightmares. You cannot just audit a soul like it is a spreadsheet. Kaelor looked as if he was about to faint from shock. Two humans standing in the holiest of holies, scolding the High Queen. Serafa looked at Arya. Then she looked at Ethan. Slowly, the giant queen lowered her head until her nose was touching the floor. It was a bow of apology. You are correct, Serafa said. Her voice was soft, stripping away the royal resonance. I have sat on this throne for 400 years. I listen to the stars, and sometimes I forget to listen to the individuals. I saw the listener, but I did not see the man. For that, Ethan Ward, I offer you my deepest apology. You are not a tool. You are a sovereign being. Ethan felt the anger drain out of him, leaving only exhaustion. He had expected wrath. He had not expected humility. Kaelor, Serafa said, without lifting her head. Do you see? The old priest looked at the humans, then at his queen. Tears welled in his eyes. I see my queen. Strength does not roar. It admits when it is wrong. Serafa raised her head. So now, Ethan Ward, the choice is truly yours. No tests. No prophecies. She gestured to the empty pedestal. The shard must be reunited with the planet to heal the magnetic field permanently. You can place the toy in the socket. If you do, the essence you carry will be drawn out of you and return to the stone. You will be free. You will be silent. You will be fully human. Or, Ethan asked. Or, Serafa said, you keep the connection. You become the permanent bridge. But know this, if you keep it, you will never be silent again. You will hear the planet's joy, but also its pain. You will be the translator between two worlds that do not always want to understand each other. It is a burden no one should be forced to carry. Ethan looked at the pedestal. It looked peaceful, a place to lay down the load. He thought about the silence, the beautiful, empty silence of a workshop where the only sound was the hum of the ventilation. He could go back. He could marry Arya. They could live a normal life. No more headaches, no more storms. He looked at Arya. She was watching him, her eyes full of love, but she said nothing. She was giving him the freedom the queen had promised. Then he looked at Lumi. The kitten was batting a piece of floating dust, completely unbothered by the fate of the world. She caught the dust, sneezed, and looked at Ethan with a happy, trusting trill. Ethan smiled. He realized that the silence he had craved for 20 years was actually loneliness. He had hidden in the dark because the light was too loud. But now, he had someone to hold his hand in the light. "I think," Ethan said slowly, "that I have gotten used to the noise." He turned to Sarafa. "I will keep it." Arya let out a breath she had been holding. She squeezed his hand. "Are you sure?" Sarafa asked. "There is no turning back." "I am sure," Ethan said. "But I have conditions." "Name them," the Queen said. "First," Ethan said, holding up a finger, "no statues, no worship. I am not a holy figure. I am not a prophet. If anyone calls me the Chosen One, I charge them double for repairs." Sarafa's whiskers twitched with amusement. "Agreed." "Second," Ethan said, "I am not doing this alone. I want to build a school, not a temple. A school. Here on the spire. We call it the Listening House. Humans and Lunari. We teach them how to hear each other. We teach them that the noise is just music they do not understand yet." "A noble goal," Sarafa said. "It shall be done." "And third," Ethan said, looking at Kalor. "He helps me. He knows the theory. I know the practice. We work together. Partners." Kalor's jaw dropped. "Me, but I was your enemy." "You were a grump," Ethan corrected. "But you know your stuff. And you care about the spire. I need someone to yell at me when I get the frequency wrong." Kalor looked at Sarafa. The Queen nodded. The old priest straightened his spine. He looked at Ethan with a new expression, respect. "It would be an honor, listener." "Good," Ethan said. He picked up the toy from the floor. "So, how do we fix the planet without me losing my spark?" "We harmonize," Sarafa said. "Place the toy on the pedestal, but keep your hand upon it. Do not give the light. Share it. Become the circuit." Ethan walked to the pedestal. He placed the gravity dancer in the socket. It clicked into place. He looked at Arya. "Ready." "Always," she said. He placed his hand on the spinning top. The room flooded with light. But this time it was not blinding. It was warm. It was gold and violet and human orange. Ethan felt the song of Neuralis rush into him, but instead of overwhelming him, it flowed through him, tempered by the toy, regulated by his own will. He felt the jagged tear in the planetary magnetic field. He reached out with his mind not to pull it shut, but to sew it. Stitch, stitch, hum. He felt Kalor's voice joining him, a deep bass line of support. He felt Arya's presence, a clear, steady rhythm. He felt Sarafa's power, a vast ocean, holding them all up. The heartstorm ended, not with a bang, but with a sigh. The tension in the air evaporated. The magnetic crushing weight lifted. Ethan took his hand off the pedestal. The toy continued to spin, glowing with a soft, steady pulse, perfectly in sync with the heartbeat of the planet. "It is done," Sarafa whispered. Ethan looked at his hand. It was trembling, but he felt light. He felt the planet, yes. He heard the distant murmur of the spire above. But it wasn't noise anymore. It was a symphony, and he was the conductor. Epilogue, 6 months later. The sign above the door had been repainted. It no longer read Ward's Repairs and Restorations. It now read The Spire Listening House Instrument Repair. The workshop had been expanded. The wall separating the shop from the adjacent warehouse had been knocked down, creating a large open space filled with light. On one side of the room, Kalor was surrounded by a group of 6 students, 3 human children and 3 Lunari kittens. He was holding a tuning fork and lecturing them sternly about the importance of resonant discipline, though his tail was twitching with suppressed amusement as one of the kittens tried to catch the vibrations with its paws. On the other side, Arya was sitting at a desk covered in datapads, translating a stack of ancient scrolls, while simultaneously mediating a dispute between a Lunari merchant and a human hydroponics farmer about the correct color of apology. And in the center, at his usual workbench, sat Ethan. He looked tired, but it was a good tired, the kind that came from meaningful work. He was polishing the bridge of a cello, humming a tune that was a mix of a Terran folk song and a Lunari hymn. Lumi was asleep in his toolbox draped over a wrench, like it was a royal pillow. She had grown larger in the last 6 months, her fur now glowing with a steady, mature violet light, but she was still a menace to organized workspaces. The bell above the door chimed. Ethan looked up. "One moment, please." A young human girl no older than 7 walked in. She looked terrified. She was clutching something tightly against her chest. Behind her, her father hovered nervously looking at the Lunari students with wide, uncertain eyes. The girl walked up to the counter. She looked at Ethan, then at the glowing alien cat in the toolbox. "Hi," Ethan said gently. He put down the cello. "What can I do for you?" The girl sniffled. She held out her hand. In her palm lay a small, cheap plastic music box. It was cracked down the middle. "It stopped singing," the girl whispered. "My daddy said you fix big things. Like planets. Can you fix small things too?" The room went quiet. Kaylor stopped lecturing. Arya looked up from her work. Ethan looked at the girl. He opened his senses. He felt the small, jagged sadness of the broken plastic. He felt the girl's hope, bright and fragile as a soap bubble. He didn't need the power of the listener for this. He didn't need to channel a star. He smiled. It was the same smile he had worn the night a purple kitten wandered into his life. "You know," Ethan said, taking the music box gently from her hand. "The secret to fixing planets is that they are just made of a lot of small things put together." He picked up his screwdriver. He tapped the music box. Tap, tap, ta. Lumi woke up, yawned, and chirped a greeting to the girl. The girl giggled, her fear evaporating. "Let's take a look," Ethan said, pulling up a stool for her. "I think we can make it sing again. We will start with the small things." Outside the window, the planet Tessera turned vast and beautiful and peaceful. Inside, the music box began to play a simple tinny tune. It was not a symphony, but to Ethan Ward, it was the most beautiful sound in the universe. The end.